Josh Rogin is with us. He's the author of Chaos Under Heaven and a columnist with the Washington Post. Now, I'm not going to hold that against him, but he has been on this Rand Paul Fauci debate, and I'm not hearing anybody telling the truth in the mainstream media. Josh is trying to change all that. Hello, Josh. How are you?
Hey, Glenn. Great to be back with you.
Thank you. So how is this not an open and shut case with Dr. Fauci?
Well, we've spent a year and a half placing Anthony Fauci on this pedestal and venerating him as a deity. And so when he gets into the 5-minute shouting match with Rand Paul, it's very easy for everyone to just write the story that Fauci got vanquished by Rand Paul without actually listening to what these two men were saying and seeing which one makes the most sense. And
right.
Just follow the issue of what Anthony Fauci has been doing in terms of throwing cold water on the lab leak theory and avoiding congressional oversight of the NIH's relationships with these Wuhan labs, then you can understand why people like Rand Paul and lots of other people, including lots of our scientists, think Fauci is playing a double game here, that he's using his authority and his popularity and his ability to have the Democratic Party in Congress come to his defense every time he gets into one of these scuffles to distract us from the real issue. And the real issue is that the NIH, and not just the NIH, and USAID and the Pentagon and all of these other U.S. agencies were doing work funneling American taxpayer money and know-how to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And now that the pandemic broke out on the doorstep of the lab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology has told us all to go pound sand. And how can that be? And why were we doing all of this collaboration? And do you still want to do this collaboration with a bunch of Chinese labs that won't even let us into the lab when the crisis breaks out? And you don't even have to believe that the lab leak theory is true to understand that people like Anthony Fauci, who were the head of this collaboration, who promoted this collaboration, whether you call it gain of function or you don't call it gain of function, that's kind of a word game. We can get into that if you want to. But the bottom line is that's a red herring, because Fauci was in charge of overseeing this collaboration, and he failed in that fiduciary responsibility. It's obvious because now when we're trying to get into the lab to investigate the greatest pandemic in human history, they won't even open the lab to us. So what are we, schmucks? We want to give them more money when they tell us we can't even go into the lab to do the investigation? That's what Anthony Fauci is arguing for, and that seems crazy to me.
Josh, can we go into the word games here being played with gain of function for a minute? Because it does appear to, I think, the average person looking at this, that Anthony Fauci is just playing semantics here. The documents literally say gain of function on them, and he's trying to make this argument that it's obvious it is not gain of function. How do we navigate this path?
Right, sure. So, again, I think it is a word game, but it's worth parsing out because it's confusing to everyone. What we know is that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing work to modify bat coronaviruses in ways that made them more transmissible and more dangerous to human beings, okay? And that's what they published. That's what they admitted to. That's not even in dispute. Now, to Rand Paul and to me and to you, if you're gaining the function of a virus, well, how could that not be gain of function? And what Fauci's game here is that he's pointing to a specific definition that the NIH uses to determine whether or not they should submit this gain of function research to their own review body. In other words, is it risky enough to warrant another level of review? But what's funny about that, not ha-ha funny, but kind of ironic funny, is that definition was written by the NIH and Anthony Fauci. In other words, he crafted a definition to exclude all of the research that he was in charge of. And so then he built an oversight mechanism and then never used it. Okay, they built an entire oversight mechanism, review board, after the Obama administration paused the gain of function research because it's risky, because lab accidents happen all the time. And they turned it back on, and Anthony Fauci was instrumental in turning it back on inside the government during the Trump administration when the Trump officials weren't paying attention. And then he wrote the definition and designed the oversight system so it was never used. Okay, and then when the bat coronavirus pandemic breaks out on the doorstep of the bat coronavirus lab, and everyone's like, hey, Anthony Fauci, can we take a look at your documents? And by the way, he says, no, I won't even give my documents over. And then, by the way, do you think now that it was perhaps you should have reviewed this risky research? You could make, in other words, it's going to be tough to prosecute Anthony Fauci for lying because in his mind he's telling the truth. But the point is that he's bragging about a loophole that he created. He built a loophole into the system, then he walked through the loophole, and then he uses it to defend himself. And that is probably a good defense against perjury, but it's not a good defense against, hey, why were you doing all this risky research with all these Chinese labs that tell us to go pound sand when there's a pandemic there?
It's like having a cheating husband and having the cheating husband design what cheating is. And he says, well, massage parlors aren't cheating, right? Like, well, okay. Right. I mean, but you designed the rules that amount to cheating. So, of course, you're not going to break them.
Right. Or it's like I always like to say it's like, having Robert Kardashian judge OJ. Okay, right. Doesn't mean that Robert Kardashian is not like a great lawyer, but he's got a conflict of interest because he's friends with OJ. Okay, and that's what I'm getting to here is that Anthony Fauci, by the way, if you read the New York Times yesterday, is preparing to ask Congress for billions of dollars more to expand risky virus research to every kind of virus there is, influenza, you name it, okay? That's his project. That's his end game. He gave an interview in the New York Times where he said, the pandemic shows we have to spend billions more digging up viruses all over the world, taking them back to labs. Now, on CNN on Sunday, Jake Tapper asked Anthony Fauci, do you still think it's a good idea to do business with these Wuhan labs that we can't even get into? And he said, don't worry, we've always been safe. We'll continue to be safe. In essence, he's saying, trust me. Okay, and that doesn't – when you know this, Glenn, when a public official says, trust me,
they're lying.
That's when you know something's fishy. That's when you know you have to install some oversight. So my point is that we can't have a system where the doctors and scientists oversee the doctors and scientists because they don't understand national security, and they definitely don't understand what's going on in China now, which is the bigger scope of my book, which is that –
no, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Which is that, these scientists in China may be very nice people, but they're not in control. They live in a totalitarian dictatorship that's becoming more aggressive and more repressive, and that means us harm. And that if you understand China, you understand that they're not doing open science anymore and that they've taken all of our money and know-how and built another part of the lab where they've worked with the Chinese military to do whatever they want to do with those viruses outside of our purview. That's what the Trump administration revealed. That's what the Biden administration has confirmed, as that U.S. intelligence shows. They took us, okay? They took all of our help, and then they built the other part of the lab to build something that was aimed at us. That's what military bio research is. We have a program, they have a program. Now the question is, going forward, do we want to continue to fund and build their military bio research program? Is that a good idea, especially when they won't even let us into the city that the pandemic broke out into? That seems crazy to me, but that's what Fauci is explicitly advocating for.
So how did we miss the fact that the guy who's running this lab is a former, I think, general, at least in the Communist Party army, and his job was bioweapons?
What happened was for the first year of this pandemic, and Glenn, I know you know this well, we couldn't even talk about the Wuhan labs. You were called racist or conspiracy theorist for even uttering the word Wuhan lab. And I know this because I got attacked all the time, and many people like me. And the problem, of course, was that the reason that was considered a conspiracy theory was because the friends of the lab, including Peter Daszak and the EcoHealth Alliance and lots of other friends of Anthony Fauci, put out a bunch of scientific papers saying the lab was totally impossible and you're a racist, a conspiracy theorist if you mention the lab. So that's why for a year we couldn't even have a rational conversation. We still can't have a rational conversation in a Senate hearing about how we got into this mess, about how the pandemic that killed 4 million people and 630,000 Americans started, which is crucial information, by the way, for preventing the next one. In other words, if we don't figure out how this started, how are we going to prevent the next one? Do you want to do this every year? So the fact that in Wuhan they have a bio weapons program, bio research program with the military is not really a shocking thing to say, after all, because of course they do, because we have one, they have one. That's what you do if you're a big country. You have a bioweapons research program. But the fact that that was also may have been linked to, or they may have taken our know-how from our government-funded projects, that's a big problem. That's a big, scary thing to think about. It has implications for the entire industry of scientific collaboration, and that's Anthony Fauci's industry. He's the head of that, a part of that industry. So lots of big, powerful interests here are getting upset just by the idea of getting to the truth of this. And that's not even talking about the Chinese government cover-up. They're covering up the lab. There's a reason they're covering up the lab. They don't want people to look through their bioweapons program. Why would they want that? So they've got a real problem here too. So it's very easy for the Biden administration to just do a 90-day intelligence review and then come out and say, well, we couldn't figure it out. Oh, well, let's all go on with our days. But that's a very dangerous path to go down. That's what Anthony Fauci would like us to do. He'd like us to say, oh, that's his new line. Oh, well, I don't know what's going on in China, but, we're never going to find out. So what are you going to do? But that's the problem, is that we don't know what's going on in China. Why was he funding these labs if we can't know what's going on inside them? That seems to me to be the easiest thing we can solve, whether the lab leak theory is true or not.
Any justice going to be done on Fauci? Is anyone going to follow up on this? Will he be held accountable for anything?
Well, here's the thing. Right now we have several congressional investigations trying to get the documents, not just, again, from Fauci, but from USAID. Why won't Anthony Blinken hand over the documents? Samantha Power, Francis Collins at the NIH. There are Pentagon documents about tens of millions of dollars that the Pentagon, the U.S. Pentagon, gave to the EcoHealth Alliance that went to these Wuhan labs. We need all of that stuff. Well, the reason it's not happening is because no Democrats are on board. If you had
why
one
would why would the Pentagon want to fund that if it wasn't gain of research or gain of function?
And the Defense Threat Reduction Agency gave millions of dollars to the EcoHealth Alliance, and some of that went to the Wuhan labs. They were trying to, cooperate with China's bio research program, which is now looks kind of crazy. Now it looks kind of, they didn't know that at the time. Now we know that. So the question is, what are we going to do going forward, and how can we even know what to do if those documents all remain secret? So we need at least one Democratic committee chairman to threaten to use the subpoena power to get those documents that are in the hands of the U.S. government. It's our stuff. They need to release our intelligence. We don't need the Chinese Communist Party to give us permission to investigate. You wouldn't ask OJ for permission to investigate OJ, would you? No, you would just use your powers and influence to do the investigation, whether the defendant likes it or not. The Chinese government is not going to like it, and Democrats don't want to risk upsetting the U.S.-China relationship. But I say if you don't risk upsetting the delicate sensibilities of the Chinese Communist Party to figure out the death of 630,000 Americans, what would you risk it for? What could be more important? What could be more crucial to our national security and our public health?